Now that the interrogation was finished, the king dismissed all but the dark elf from his war room. Defense Minister Krim, along with the rest of the War Council, returned to their primary task. The king was about to congratulate the dark elf for something, but then he stopped. What was he about to congratulate the dark elf for anyway? This was odd. It was like one of those moments, returning through a doorway for something forgotten, but once you pass through the doorway, you instantly forget the reason why you returned in the first place. Noticing the dark elf was holding a scroll in his hand, the very same scroll he'd earlier placed on the table. As the dark elf slipped the scroll into his bag, the king asked, "How did you get that?" The dark elf replied, "Your Highness, you gave it to me?" The king, a bit disoriented, felt somewhat dizzy. For the moment he accepted the dark elf's answer, only because he needed a break. He was certain he never handed the scroll back to the dark elf. His memory was somewhat obscured. Something did not seem right, and at the moment he did not feel well. The dark elf picked up his things, making his way towards the exit. On his way, he said, "Your Highness, if you will excuse me, I must prepare now." The king's only response to this was, "Yes, of course, go ahead." The dark elf was gone. The king was now alone in his war room. The door exiting the room was left wide open. He could see a figure standing at its entryway staring straight at him, but he could not make out who it was. He wasn't expecting anybody. Then he addressed this dark figure whom he did not recognize. He said, "This is a private meeting. Why have you interrupted? What is it you want?" When the dark figure answered the king, he instantly recognized the voice. It was that of a young girl. She said, "Father, you don't look well. Are you feeling okay?" The king quickly regained his senses. There was nothing about this dark figure that stood before him that changed at all, not physically, nor perceptibly. The person he saw before him at this moment was his daughter. Now he recognized her. He answered his daughter's question. He said, "Yes, Anaris, I am well. Why do you ask?" She glared at him. It was the kind of look defined by someone who did not believe the answer given. Answering her father's question, she said, "I don't like what you're doing. I do not trust that dark elf. You think he will save us, but I can see beyond that. I don't like who he is. Father, don't do this. Do not accept his help." The king was caught off guard by this response from his daughter. You could say he was somewhat dumbfounded. At the moment, he had no idea how to respond. He said to his daughter, "Anaris, what choice do we have? There is no other option." Anaris cut him off. She said, "We have options. We have other choices. I talked to Krim. He says that you will not listen to the council. Instead, you forced executive power. You made them agree. Father, this isn't like you. What's happening to you? What are you thinking?" The king snapped at her, which was unusual. He was known to be very well-tempered. He was never easily agitated even under tough circumstances. He said to his daughter, "Anaris, I've heard enough. You are a princess, not a little girl. Act like a princess. One day you will rule this kingdom. Then you will understand what it is like to be the king. Then the decisions will be yours to make." Anaris said nothing to her father. She only stared at him, and for a moment turning her back to the king, she walked off. The king called for his servants. He needed a drink so that he could relax. He returned to his chambers, and that's where he remained. Anaris, seemingly very upset about her father's well-being, she turned to her lady's maid and asked, "Am I wrong to distrust that dark elf? My father said I was acting like a little girl. I hate when he says that." The lady's maid's name is Palia. For the past 6 months, her job has been to tend all personal needs of the princess, and she is proven to be very well fitted for this task. Before 6 months ago, nobody knew who Pelia was. And now, everyone knew her as a very nice old lady, second to none as an aide to the princess. Pelia did not answer the princess's question right away. Instead she asked, "Why does your father think you are acting like a little girl?" Anaris answered, she said, "I don't know." She hesitated for a moment, then continued, "He thinks I don't know what it's like to be in his position. He said, one day I will know what it's like to be king. As if I knew nothing, that's how I felt he was treating me." Pelia responded to what Anaris was telling her. She said, "It seems to me that your concern for your father might be legitimate. You're not acting like a little girl. By telling your father that you are concerned, you're letting him know that you care. In fact, it is important you always speak to your father of such things." "I don't think you're wrong, but Anaris, please be careful. Feeling apprehensive about the dark elf may be well-founded, and the fact your father has been acting very peculiar lately. It is for certain that he's not himself." Pausing for a moment, as if she'd have something else to say about the king's mercenary guest, she stopped, and for some reason, changed the subject. She said, "Anaris, keep a close eye on your father, and steer away from the dark elf." If Anaris hadn't known better, she might have thought that Pelia knew more about the situation than she was letting on. The princess questioned her lady's maid. She asked, "Pelia, do you know anything about the dark elf? Is there something you're hesitating?" Pelia answered the princess. She said, "I know what you've told me. I know that you don't trust him, and it's all I need know to be convinced that you have a genuine concern for your father." Anaris apologized to Pelia. She said, "I am sorry, my last question sounded like an accusation. A lot has been on my mind lately. I guess I must be a little paranoid." Quickly, Pelia excused the princess from the need to make any apology, by saying, "It's perfectly all right, Your Highness, an apology isn't needed, your concerns are reasonable." Pelia made an attempt to redirect the conversation. Would Her Highness like to be entertained? Some music, or even a performance play, something to take the mind away from unpleasant thoughts? Anaris responded by saying, "Perhaps you are right, Pelia. But I can't." She declined Pelia's suggested offer. "It's just that, this matter, it seems far too important to put off." Anaris paused for a second, then continued, "I wish that." She stopped in the middle of her sentence. Contemplating what to say, she started again, "I wish that there was a way to see what that, oh how that, ooh." She lost the word she was trying to get past her lips. The adjective she was in search of seemed to be at the tip of her tongue, although not the word she originally had in mind. Anaris managed to find a word suitable to describe her meaning. She finished her sentence. She said, "Unscrupulous. That unscrupulous dark elf is up to no good. I don't believe for one second that his intentions are any less than hostile." Suddenly, the look on Anaris's face changed. It was a look of momentary delight, as if she had a thought, or an idea that suddenly entered into her head. Already facing Pelia, she cracked sort of a smile. Then she said, "Pelia, I'm going to need your help with something." Pelia said nothing in response. Instead she just nodded her head, suggesting her willingness to comply with the princess. Anaris then continued. She said, "I need you to keep an eye on my father for me. Make sure he doesn't notice that I'm out and about, and however possible, cover my absence during the evening agenda. There's something I need to do." Again, Pelia nodded her head. She replied, "As you wish, my lady." Anaris thanked Pelia, then turned, leaving in the opposite direction. Making her way outside, her pace was that of such velocity, anyone passing her on her way certainly got the impression that she must have been on some sort of mission. What she really wanted was to find out more about this mysterious dark elf. She was not sure where the dark elf was staying. There were 39 guest rooms in the castle. 32 of them she knew were already occupied, and that gave her 7 options to eliminate. She ranged over the possibilities. Anaris heard a man's voice. It came from behind. The man's voice formally addressed her royal position, calling for her attention. The man said, "Your Highness." Recognizing who it was, even before turning around, she responded to his call. She said, "Gallinor." Turning to face the man, she continued, "What matter so important? Important enough to interrupt my agenda, requires my attention." Gallinor was captain of the royal elite, a special guard unit, responsible for protecting the princess. Although Gallinor's loyalty had to be to the king, in times of subversion his main priority would certainly be the princess. This was his life duty. As sole heir to the throne, the royal longevity also ensured a long career for Gallinor, as the alternative would be rather unspeakable. He said, "Forgive my intrusion, Your Highness. The king has commanded your presence at once." Anaris, seen somewhat amused by this strange demand from her father, she asked Gallinor, "And for what reason has my father commanded me?" Answering the princess, Gallinor said, "My lady." He bowed his head as a formal gesture. He indicated that the message he conveyed was a decree from her father, or as formally put, the king. He continued with the king's message. He said, "You have been ordered, Your Highness. Your father doesn't think it's safe for you to be wandering around freely and without an escort." Anaris cut him off. She said, "I haven't even left the castle. I do not need an escort. Besides, this place has more fortifications than an orcish prison." When she finished speaking, Gallinor continued. He started at the point when she cut him off. "Your Highness, the king has declared a state of emergency. He worries for your safety." "As do we all," Anaris responded to Gallinor's statement. She said, "He wants me in protective custody, doesn't he?" Gallinor did not answer the princess. Instead he just nodded his head. Not even waiting for Gallinor's verbal response, Anaris broke out into her own emotional fit. She said, "I knew it. There is something wrong with my father. He'd never act in such a manner, no matter the circumstances. It's that malefic dark elf. He has my father under some kind of mesmeric spell. I'm sure of it." Calming down her emotion a bit, she continued, "Gallinor, you must help me." Gallinor responded by asking, "My princess, in what form do you need my help?" The princess proceeded to instruct him on what she needed him to do. She said, "Tell no one that you've seen me, especially my father. No one must know that I am absent. Somehow, lead my father away from this idea. And lastly, help me find out where the dark elf is." Gallinor gave the princess his assurance and loyalty. He said, "Your Highness, my princess, I will do everything in my power." The king secluded himself inside his private quarters, intending to be there for just a few minutes, but more than 1 hour passed, and with passing of time, he became increasingly weary. He prostrated himself on the sofa, hoping to relieve his fatigue, but it was useless. At this point, his anxiety had overcome his desire to rest. His daughter's voice echoed inside his head. Over and over again, he could hear her say, "Do not trust the dark elf." Although those were not her actual words, it's what she tried to tell him, and those words would eventually come back to haunt him. He knew, and certainly understood why she was upset, but this is a desperate time, and desperate times require desperate measures. By now, the king had given up his effort to relax his nerves. It was time to prepare for the evening agenda, and a second meeting with the dark elf. The king turned around and faced the doorway. He was instantly startled by a dark image that stood before him. It was the dark elf. The king instantly responded. He said, "How did you get in here?" The dark elf responded by saying, "Your Highness, you invited me here?" The king was confused. His initial response to this was only 2 words. He said, "What? How?" Pausing for a moment to analyze his surroundings, he noticed nothing else out of the ordinary. He continued his response. He said, "I mean, how did you get in this room? Who let you in?" The dark elf smiled while answering the king. "Your Highness, we need to discuss our understanding." The king was confounded by the dark elf's affirmation. He restated the dark elf's words. He said, "Our understanding?" The dark elf answered the king. He said, "The order of our disposition, Your Highness." The king seemed confused, and so the dark elf resumed. "The arrangement of payment, noble king." The king did not remember summoning the dark elf to his quarters, however, knowing the matter needed attention. The arrangement still had to be finalized. He recommenced the conversation. He said, "I'll pay you upon completion of the task, in which I hired you for. What other arrangement are you here to discuss?" The dark elf answered the king's question. "Your Highness," he said, "there is no other arrangement." The king stood there watching the dark elf. As the elf approached, he twirled his staff, switching it from one hand to his other. Then he picked up where he left off. He said, "Upon completion of the contract, from which I am employed by you, I require partial payment. Hence, before the 3rd quarter of your calendar year I will return, for the remainder of the settlement." When the dark elf finished speaking, the king quickly interjected, recapitulating his understanding of the arrangement agreed upon. In sort of a questioning form he said, "Upon completion of the job I hired you for, in approximately 9 months, he explained his comprehensive point of view, "I see no reason why I cannot pay you in just one payment. Then there won't be a need for your return to my precious municipality." The dark elf gave a half-witted glare, knowing the king was not completely aware of all the conditions of the contract. He intended to use the seemingly minor detail to his advantage, repealing his facial expressions. He said, "Your Highness, it is clear that you have not finished going through the terms of our agreement. If it were possible for you to pay me all at once, then circumstances would need to be much different than what currently leads you. A suggestion, O resplendent king, that once again you review the terms of our arrangement. After the deal has been endorsed, it cannot be undone."